Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. As the devastating war in Gaza continues, dozens of cities across the U.S. have passed resolutions in support of a ceasefire. They include Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, and our very own Somerville, Cambridge, and just this week, Medford. Somerville passed its resolution first in late January with a 9-2 vote. Days later, Cambridge passed its own unanimously. Medford passed theirs with a 5-1 vote and one council member voting present. The resolutions come after months of protests and demonstrations in our region calling for an end to the war. And we want to know what we can draw from the success of these resolutions besides symbolism. So, we brought back Professor of Political Science at UMass Boston, Leila Farsakh, to discuss what these ceasefire resolutions mean, both locally and beyond. Leila, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Leila, I want to start out by discussing these resolutions that passed in Cambridge, Somerville, and Medford. But first, I want to just do a quick summary of what's in them. They addressed the Hamas attacks on October 7th in Israel, which resulted in about 1,200 people killed and around 240 hostages taken, according to Israeli officials. And it also mentions Israel's military response in Gaza, which has killed more than 27,000 Palestinians, including more than 10,000 children, and has created a severe humanitarian crisis where nearly 2 million people have been displaced, according to numbers from the UN. Each expresses support for a ceasefire, the implementation of humanitarian aid, and the release of all hostages. Now, Leila, you listened in on the Cambridge session. What was your initial reaction when it passed?
I think it was a very important step. I was heartened to see that people in Cambridge, as well in Somerville, and you said just recently Medford, are standing for human rights and standing for the humanity and the rights of the Palestinians and the right to everybody in Israel-Palestine to live in peace and not in war. So I think to have a number of cities in Massachusetts speaking truth to power and calling for a ceasefire represents its commitment to our humanity and to the unacceptability of war as any means to solve any conflict.
Mm-hmm. You know, this comes months after protests in the region, right? And Cambridge even voted down a similar resolution back in November. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on why these votes are happening now, you know?
Yeah. Is it happening now? Because the war has lasted too long. I mean, Israel's response to the atrocities of October 7th was to launch a full-scale war. And people at the beginning were hoping that this war would be quick. But the war dragged. And the result has been major devastation like we've never seen before. And as you said, there is famine now. There's 2 million people who are displaced. In November, people thought, okay, the war will end soon. Israel has a right to defend itself. But I think now it became clear that Israel's right to defend itself does not mean eliminating the Palestinian people, or can be achieved by eliminating and penalizing the Palestinian people in Gaza. I think that's what's very important. And as you said, what has been interesting over the past few months was not just the protest internationally, but also in Massachusetts, in Boston, across the U.S. There are lots of people out in the street saying the Palestinians have right, and their right is to right to life, let alone right to also to not to live in famine. We're risking famine right now, and they have a right to their homes. They are being displaced. And also I think the ICJ ruling was very important, because here you have the International Court of Justice saying Israel has responsibility to international law, and Israel is a signatory to the Genocide Convention.
Mm-hmm. I wondered, how do you see the international reaction to not only Massachusetts City, but U.S. cities passing these ceasefire resolutions?
I think it's positive, and it's also indicative of a change happening in the United States. As you know,
Yeah.
this conflict has been going on for over 7 decades. And the fact that today we see all these massive demonstrations in the United States tells you that the US public, the American public, is much more aware of the reality on the ground, is much more aware of the Palestinian oppression that has been going on, and is much more willing to go out and defend Palestinian rights, because they also see their intersectionality with other struggles, with the African American struggle, with the migrant struggle. That, we need all to be living in peace. Is that the Middle East and Massachusetts are not separate from one another. We're all human beings. We're all global citizens, and injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. These resolutions, Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, other cities, they don't really have official power to call for a ceasefire, right? Or make a ceasefire happen.
Right.
Therefore, they're pretty much symbolic. But I do wonder, what sort of impact can they have?
As you said, it is symbolic, but it's also very important. It's impactful insofar as it's sending also a message to national politics and federal politics. Americans care about injustice. The Americans care about an end of the war in Israel-Palestine, that Americans are going to vote and are aware of what's going on, and that they will not stand for the negation of Palestinian rights. I think that's very important. You're seeing a new generation of activists. There is growing support for and realization of the humanity of the Palestinians and the right of the Palestinians, and that Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace in the region. And affirming the humanity of both. I mean, as you said, the resolution in Cambridge emphasized that hostages needs to be released, that everybody needs to live in peace in the region, and I think that's something very important. Whereas in the past the emphasis was only on Israeli suffering, I think now there's an emphasis that everybody is suffering over there, and war is not the answer.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be right back.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back with more from UMass professor Leila Farsakh. Now, with that, these resolutions, they're not official, right? They can't officially call a ceasefire, but
right.
Their text includes directions to send them to President Joe Biden and their federal delegation from Massachusetts. Where do you see congressional representatives and senators standing on ceasefire? Like, how are you seeing their positions right now?
Yeah, okay. So that's very important. I mean, this resolution is a way being sent to Biden, as we know very clearly. State politics does not impact foreign policy. This we know. It's a symbolism, and also it's a way of telling the administration that his constituents are holding him also accountable and expressing their desire that they don't want atrocities to be done in their name. They don't want their taxpayer money going for more war rather than for peace. So as to what's happening on the national level, I mean, I'm hoping this will have impact, at least insofar as the Congress, the House is concerned. I mean, we know Ayanna Pressley, our representative, has had a very positive role she applauded this resolution. She and other congressmen we know have been calling for a ceasefire. It's having definitely resonance on national politics. They haven't passed anything in the Senate because it's very hard to pass anything in the Senate right now. But what matters is that our representatives are hearing us and are aware that this is not a topic they can ignore which was not the case 20 or 30 years ago. So I consider this a progress. And also the importance of local politics. We always underestimate the importance of local politics. But local politics does matter. It works in different ways. But today in the world we're in and with social media, the resonance of domestic politics can be quite powerful.
Yeah, it's a slow game. It's a slow game. We kind of touched on the shift in public opinion, right, after seeing the devastation of this war, and taking into account how it's complicating a more permanent, long-term peace. This is all happening during an election year. Earlier this month, AP reported half of U.S. adults say Israel's military campaign in Gaza has gone too far.
Uh-huh.
I'm wondering how you see this affecting the November presidential election, or do you think it's too early to tell?
No, I think it's going to have an impact because, I think Arab American voices and Muslim voices have made themselves quite loud and clear in their objection to Biden's policy. Now, you would argue in Massachusetts it doesn't really matter because Massachusetts is always Democrat. But I think in other swing states it will matter, and it will matter a lot. So this is also what makes me hope that Biden will push for a ceasefire one way or another pretty soon. So I think that's very important, but definitely it is impacting the vote of the young people. We're seeing young people being they're coming into consciousness, into political consciousness in this war. And that's impacting how they're seeing the world and how they're going to vote. There is a generational shift taking place where Jewish American, especially like groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, are also saying, not in my name. And what Israel is doing is unacceptable. And the U.S. has the ability to hold Israel accountable. And we've seen, historically, we have example where the U.S. administration did impose pressure on Israel to stop its action. We saw it in 1991. We saw it in 1982. So the U.S. has the means to put pressure. And I think the fact that these resolutions, these massive demonstrations, this young generation emerging is going to have an impact, is signaling to the Democratic Party that it needs to adapt if it wants to continue to win and be relevant politically.
Understood. Well, on that note, Leila, thank you so much for taking some time to come talk with us here at The Common. It is truly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Daryl. It was a pleasure for me too.
That's Professor of Political Science at UMass Boston, Leila Farsakh. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBURTheCommon or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I will talk to you tomorrow.